Morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone to our informational town hall this morning to discuss water and sewer issues. If you don't know me, my name is Steve Poloni. I'm the city manager, and I will. First of all, I'd like to make a few introductions. Well, let me say this first. There are refreshments here. If you need a water, there's some water here. I do want to thank Councilman Gellert, who provided the bagels this morning. And our finance director was in a baking mood last night, so he baked cookies. So if he's not only a finance director, but also a baker. So we want to thank both of them for adding to this morning's event. First of all, I'd like to make some introductions. I'd like to say this first of all. The city presenters this morning will be Mike Way, who is our DPW director and has been in charge of water and sewer since 2018. And the other presenter will be Gail Kraniak, who is our finance director, who has 25 years plus experience in city government. So both of those will be our presenters today. And then I'd like to introduce our guests. And I do want to make really a special thank you to our guests because they don't work Saturdays normally, and they came out this morning on a Saturday to assist in this, and I'd like to introduce them. First, from SEMSD, Kip Walby, who is Director of Operations, and Kyle Seidel, who's the AEW Consultant Engineer from SEMSD. From Gleewa today, we have Matt Lane, who is the Manager of Charges Outreach and Modeling. And from Hubble, Roth, and Clark, our city engineers are Jennifer Morial and Eddie Zimish. So I'd like to, first of all, just thank them this morning. The purpose of today is just it's an informational town hall to share some things about our water and sewer departments and a little bit of the format today. So everyone has a packet before you, and what we put in those packets, we gave you something to write with. The PowerPoint presentation is in there, as well as we put in a reliability study that we did a few years ago, so that as part of our asset management plan and other things for you to review. We also put a little article about water bills that we got from Yahoo Finance that we thought someone sent me, we thought was interesting for you to read. So when you take that home, please feel free to read that. I think it's some good information in that. We won't take any questions during the presentation. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a presentation. We've provided a pen so that you can make notes in the book under any slide that you have questions about or want to come back to. And so then at the end of the presentation, we will take questions just for our panel at that time, because we're going to respect their time today. We'll ask questions of LEWA, SEMSD, and our engineers. After that, we'll take about a 5-minute break, let them depart for their safety and safety. I'm sorry, for their Saturday enjoyment. So we'll let them depart, and then staff will come back and answer questions, further questions after that.
One logistical question: is this meeting being recorded for the benefit of citizens?
It is.
Great.
Yes,
thank you.
Yes, it is. So today, the topics that we will cover during this is our water system, sewer system, budget, water bill structure, capital improvements that we've made and that are needed. And because we'll get into a few technical things as we're going along, and we're trying to make it so that you can understand it. We're going to go through some definitions, and I'm just going to go over those quickly now so that if we use an acronym during the day, you can refer back to the definitions that we put in there, or that you'll know what they're, and I'll cover those. It's important to know that we're going to talk about water and sewer separately today because they are two distinct entities. We get our water from GLEWA, our sewage is conveyed to SEMSD. So we're going to differentiate between those two today. Great Lakes Water, we may say GLEWA during the day, if you hear that, that's the entity that provides the drinking water to the city. City has a 30-year contract that goes through end of 2039. Southeast Macomb Sanitary District, SEMSD, we may say, that's who conveys the sewage from the city. You might hear EAGLE today, that's the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, formerly known as DEQ. talk about a couple of things here. A wet sanitary system, you may hear us reference today. And we're going to define that as those are normally usually an older system that have rain and groundwater that enters into the system through infiltration, groundwater, rainwater. Sometimes it's footing drains, connected downspouts, but it's water that infiltrates our system. We consider Grosse Pointe Shores as a wet system. There are also dry sanitary systems, which are usually in newer communities and newer systems where there's limited or no infiltration into the system. A couple terms here, max day and peak hour are really important terms that you're going to hear throughout the day today. And so those are terms that are used to calculate our rates. And so max day is 1 day a year when GPS uses the most amount of water. So that's used in our calculation of our rates. So that's what max day is, the 1 day of the year that we use the most water. Peak hour is the 1 hour of the year when we use the most water as well. Both of those are used in the calculation of our rates. You might hear MOU today, or Memorandum of Understanding. That was an agreement, or is an agreement, between the city and SEMSD that governs the amount of sewage conveyance, excess fees, and a corrective action plan. So you will hear a little bit about that today. Really quick, I want to talk about asset management. So it's important that every system uses an asset management plan when planning out projects and things to run that system. So what is an asset management plan? Infrastructure asset management is a systemic or systematic approach to manage the physical assets like sewers and water systems throughout their entire life cycle to optimize their performance and lifespan while minimizing costs. It involves strategies for rehabilitation, maintenance, and replacement to ensure long-term sustainability. What is the goal of asset management? The goal is to meet the required level of service in a cost-effective way through the creation, acquisition, operation, maintenance, rehabilitation, and disposal of assets to provide present and future customers. Why should you utilize an asset management plan? It's more cost-effective to be proactive than rather reactive, and we've talked about that in depth at our council meetings. You don't want to wait until water is leaking into your house to replace your roof. That's the analogy that I would use. So that's what an asset management plan is. We have one with HRC. It's always evolving. So an asset management plan every year. We just had a meeting with HRC because sometimes those plans change due to the infrastructure changing its mind. Things break, things change, and so those plans are always moving along. So and we just had recently a meeting with HRC, our engineers, to go over that plan. At this time, I am going to turn it over to Mike, and he is going to talk about water and sewer.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Way. You said I took over the water department in 2018, but I started working for Grosse Pointe Shores back in 2005. Actually, previous to that, I worked 8 years as a seasonal employee, so I have something like 28 years of experience in Grosse Pointe Shores. I was a master gardener for 10 years full time. Over the water department in 2018, took over the DPW in 2020. I do have a college degree from Michigan State University where I majored in applied engineering. It was interdisciplinary, and really it was made, what they told me when I was there, that it was made for people to be communicators between people who really don't speak English and you people who do. You know, engineers speak and get really, really technical. So I can read a blueprint. I can talk to these guys about pretty much anything and understand it. And hopefully prove today that hopefully I can explain it to you guys. I'm going to get into our Grosse Pointe Shores water system first. A brief history of this table on the right, just take a glance at it. We're going to come back to that. But those are our water mains. They've got street names. Every street has a water main, size, and a year that it was installed. We have 3 connections to GLWA, one on Moreland, one on Bernier, one on Fairford. That's how we get our water. It is metered. We operate and maintain 17.5 miles of water main. Like Steve said, we executed a 30-year contract with what was then DWSD, now GLWA. It's the same contract. GLWA was created out of the Detroit bankruptcy in 2014. Part of that bankruptcy, the state kind of forced them to have an agreement. That's what they call the 4% promise. They promised not to raise their wholesale water and sewer rates on anybody by more than 4%. And they held to that promise. In fact, they did better than that. I think they held rates lower than 4% regularly for the first 10 years. How did they do that? They'll tell you they deferred costs. They held back on hiring. Projects were delayed or held back. Well, it has sunset. So now we expect higher than 4% increases for the next several years. Now let's get into wholesale rates. It's not new. Grosse Pointe Shores has had high retail rates for a very long time. They are a reflection of our high wholesale rates. Been going on for decades. Why? Why do we have wholesale? Why do we have high wholesale rates? GLWA must operate and maintain a system to handle every customer's needs. There can never be a time when you turn on your faucet and water doesn't come on. So they build the system, they operate, they maintain filtration plants, pumps, distribution system to make sure to meet everybody's peak demand. Well, Grosse Pointe Shores is a very peaky customer. Why? Why is Grosse Pointe Shores very peaky? Well, there's several reasons. One, we're 100% residential. Residential use is inherently peaky. People wake up in the morning, they take a shower, they use the bathroom, then they go to work. Houses don't use a whole lot of water during the day. They use a lot of water in the morning, a little bit more maybe in the evening, but not during the day. Commercial properties, restaurants, car washes, they use water all day long. That helps with rates. What LEWA wants to do is control cities' peaks. They do, however, provide a peak hour exemption period between midnight and 6 a.m. And I'm going to come back to this a few times. It's the key to our sprinkler ordinance. But during the peak hour exemption period between midnight and 6 a.m., you can use as much water as you want. You have to pay per unit for that water, but the peak flows during that time are not included in our contract negotiations. So really, they want all cities to push as much peak flow, as much water use as you can between midnight and 6 a.m. That's why a lot of cities have built water storage. They fill their water storage between that time, and then they drain it during the peak demand in the morning. That lowers their peak hour contract demand, which lowers their rates. So we never built storage. Historically, I don't want to get into it too much, but we did talk about it back in 2010. I obviously wasn't part of those conversations, but Mayor has talked about it. He certainly was part of those conversations where we talked about water storage. It didn't happen. So when Steve and I got here, we had many conversations with GLWA. I said, if you want to lower rates, you really got to get control of that peak hour number. To do that, we enacted the sprinkler ordinance in 2022. Because of that, we actually got an out-of-cycle contract opener. What does that mean? GLWA has contract openers every 4 years. You need a really good reason to get a contract opener outside of those 4 years. You need to build a water storage. You need to act in an ordinance that's enforceable. They also wanted 2 years of data. So we have 2022 and 2023 of sprinkler ordinance data. And they conceded that we would have a contract opener in 2023, which resulted in a lower peak hour rate. Saved us some money. Sorry. However, we still have high commodity rate. That's a per unit charge from GLWA. We're still number 7 out of 83 real communities. They'll show you a list with maybe 87 communities on it. They'll tell you they serve 115 communities, but through authorities and other and cities that are really just one customer. There's 83 real communities on that list. We rank number 7. That's high, and it's mostly because of our peak hour and our max day. So what goes into the actual water rate formula that GLWA uses? They use our max day numbers, they use our peak hour numbers, they use our annual volume, and it all goes into a formula. It determines our slice of pie, our system apportionment. It's out of the entire system, it's how much we use. Annually, GLWA has a board-approved budget. That budget then gets distributed to everyone's slice of pie. I just want to make note that every city is treated the same. All their max day and peak hour numbers go through the same formula. Everyone gets their own slice of pie. Budget is distributed to our slice of pie. That becomes our revenue requirement. That revenue requirement is then divided on our bills. 60% is a fixed monthly charge. 40% is charged via commodity charge, which is $1 per unit. GLWA's charge sheets, you'll see a dollar amount per MCF. That stands for 1,000 cubic feet. They do that, I mean, they would probably enjoy a 100% fixed rate charge, but they don't feel that's very equitable. Water use should probably have some kind of commodity charge on it, so that's why they have it. Again, just to repeat, everyone's pie slices are adjusted every 4 years. That's during the contract openers. And again, I'll say this over and over again, the more water we use during that exemption period between midnight and 6 a.m., the cheaper our water will get, but it does take time. Now, the next few graphs, or the next few slides, I'm going to show some graphs. It gets a little technical. They're in your packet. I'm going to try to explain them as best I can. I think they have a lot of good information. I hope you can follow along. So these are WAMR graphs. WAMR is GLWA's wholesale automated meter reading service. I can see this at any time, real water use on my computer. Here, well, let me explain the graphs. The yellow line is our total water flow. This is fresh water flow that we intake. There's our 3 meters combined. The yellow line is our water flow. The purple line at the top is the non-exemption period. The break between the purple line is the exemption period. So what we really want to do is use as much water as we can during that break. Those mountains that you see, we want to move entirely into that break. Now these particular graphs, the top one is 1 week in August. So a summer, that's a typical week in the summer. And the bottom graph is a typical week in the winter. This right here, without using any numbers, is why our wholesale rates are so high. We have these giant peaks. We use water. I'm just going to guess here. I'm going to throw out a number, but we use water like a city that's 4 times our size in the summertime. We use water like a city that's half our size in the wintertime. It's this huge range, and that's why we have high wholesale rates. Another way to put it, LEWA has to build a system to provide us water for those peaks. We have to charge our residents for our water use, whether it's high or low. So we're paying for these peaks with a low amount of water use. I'm going to get a few more slides here with a few more graphs, and maybe we can understand a little bit better. So again, this is our seasonal comparison between summer and winter use. Before I go to the next slide, experts will tell us, utility finance specialists, engineers will tell you, don't compare to other cities. Every city is unique, especially here in Grosse Pointe. We're especially unique, but I digress. I know what happens. People talk to each other. We have to compare. So this next slide is the same 2 graphs for Grosse Pointe Woods. Same week, same exact week. The top graph is a typical summer graph, same week as the previous graphs for Grosse Pointe Shores. The bottom graph is a winter graph for Grosse Pointe. 2 things of note. I'm going to go back to Grosse Pointe Shores. Look how far away that peak hour line is on the bottom to our water use. Go to Grosse Pointe Woods. It's a lot closer. Also notice their peaks are happening at midnight every single day. That's when they fill their water storage. Fill it up at midnight, and then they drain it during the peak hour demand in the morning. So imagine if they didn't have a water storage, they would have 1 peak and it would be gigantic, and they'd have a much higher peak hour number. Their wholesale rates would be much higher. Their winter use, it's not as flat as ours. They get these peaks. They have a lot of commercial properties. They have car washes. They have restaurants. They use water during the day. So they can spread those peak hour costs out among more water use. That makes sense. This next graph that I'm going to show you is my favorite. It's the result from our sprinkler ordinance. The top graph is our water use during 1 week in August before our sprinkler. Bottom graph is during the same week in August after our sprinkler ordinance. Those values that I have highlighted on there are demonstrated peak hour numbers for each day. What GLWA does is finds that highest peak hour number for the entire summer. They use that over a number of years. They actually find the peak hour number over a number of years. In 2022, they went back 6 years to 2016. It was 1 hour on one day in 2016. We had a peak of nearly 2 point something. So you can see the stark difference in these numbers. That's before sprinkler ordinance and after sprinkler ordinance. Notice also where the arrow's pointing at. That's the demonstrated peak hour number. Notice it's coming off that mountain. We're now getting down to that valley. That's because we're moving that water use into the exemption period. That's what we want to do. I'd love to see it even further. I'd love to see that peak completely into the exemption period. And our peak number hours would then get down to our valley and we'd save money. So, results and goals. Remember, we want to move that mountain into the exemption period. And in the first year of having our sprinkler ordinance, we did that. We moved it from 6 a.m. to 5 a.m. We'd love to move it into 4 a.m. just to get more into that valley. In the first year of its enactment, in 2022, our peak hour number dropped nearly 33%. Well, 2022 was a very hot, dry year. So that's an even bigger accomplishment. Well, the top 5 hottest and driest summers on record was 2022. That's a headline from Fox 2 News. Our goal is to have residents continue to adhere to the sprinkler ordinance, which will assist in future rate adjustments. There are more things we can do to get that peak hour further back in the exemption. We could move the end time, the 6 a.m. time back 1 hour. There's also an even odd sprinkling ordinance addition we could add to the ordinance. Many cities do this, where they allow even numbered houses, water on even number days, odd number houses, water on odd number days. That would cut your max day nearly in half. Max day is hard to control. That's the amount of water you use in one whole day. Can't really control that with water storage. Water storage helps with your peak hour. Your max day water use is very little control, but one way to do it is with an every other day addition to our ordinance. Now I'm going to get into our infrastructure. Like I said, we come back to this graph. Notice it takes up the whole screen. It's a pretty important graph. We have the street names. There's water mains on every street, water main sizes, and the year that they were installed. This exists right now. This is not, if you don't see what the problem is, we can talk more later, but this is not unique to Grosse Pointe Shores. This is not unique to Michigan. This is a nationwide problem. There's an article in your packet written by a person at Yahoo Finance that explains that this really is a big problem nationwide. What's the problem? 70% of these streets' water mains were installed before 1960. If I start replacing water mains 1 street a year, for the next 30 years, I'll still have a couple of these that turn 100 years old. They are well beyond their life expectancy. Most of them were installed in the mid-1950s in the baby boom era. We installed one in 1996 on Sunningdale, 89 on Vernier. Other than that, not a whole lot of water main replacement went on in the 90s, in the early 2000s or the 2010s. It wasn't until Steve and I came on board. And I can pick on him because he's not here, but I believe Councilman Segal said to us, we want to stop kicking the can down the road. Well, that's what we started to do. We started replacing water mains. 2022, we did Oxford and Lakeshore. Lakeshore's a big one. I want to note on Lakeshore right now because we have 2 water mains that run the entire length of Lakeshore. 2, not just 1, 2 now 12-inch water mains that run the length of Lakeshore. It's 3 miles of water main. We replaced one of them. We found that water main to be installed in 1911. The other water main was installed in 1929. It's 100 years, it's 100 years old. We had to take out a bond for that project. We're gonna need to do it again real soon to replace the other water main. Beyond the water mains, and just talking about the water system still, other infrastructure improvements that we want to make include upgrading our water meter reading system. It is, I don't want to say it's old, we started using it in 2015, however, the manufacturer of it has ended support. So we no longer have any kind of tech support or supply support for our water meter. They are supplying us still with readers, but if our collector here at City Hall were to get a lightning strike and fry, we have no support. So we are looking to upgrade our water meter reading system in the near future. Other infrastructure needs that we need or who have come up over the years. We have additional EGLE compliance. These guys can tell you that it's almost nonstop, the additional compliance that they keep adding. Whether it's water testing, whether it's required lead line inspections and replacements. Residential cross connection inspections are coming. They now want us to inspect everybody's house for cross connections. And EGLE is very good at adding new rules without supplying any kind of funding to make that happen. The Mystic system. Well, that's something 20 years ago, Grosse Pointe Shores really didn't have to worry. Mystic system, anybody who has to dig in their yard, any kind of project, they call Mystic. We are required to locate our utilities, all four of them. We have water, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, and our street lights. All get marked every time someone calls a Mystic. That has become almost a full-time job. We get several Mystics a day. These are all needs that have come up, over the past 10 or 15 years. EGLE will keep on adding more and more regulation. And so far, we've done a very good job at absorbing those costs. Now, the next subject I know is a how. I'm going to talk about sprinkler meters. Deduct. It means the same thing. I don't want to get caught up on the title of it. We're talking about the same thing. We're talking about a meter that's dedicated to outdoor water use. Really depends on whether one's before the other or if they're side by side, whether it's a deduct meter. I don't want to get caught up in the technicality of the title. We're talking about the same. A few things I want to say about that. One, it doesn't save us any money. In fact, it probably costs us money. It does not change our wholesale revenue requirements. It cannot change. What does that mean? Well, it increases costs on a retail level because we now have to share the same wholesale revenue requirements with less billable units. That's okay. Just getting rolling too. It will increase costs for operating and administrative responsibilities. I mentioned that retail sewer rates would have to increase to cover the same revenue requirement. Industry professionals do not recommend it. Let me talk about that for just a second. This came up a couple of years ago when I was newer, and I admit I didn't know much about it, so I asked around. I talked to a lot of people. I go to a lot of meetings. I talk to DPW directors. I talk to city managers. I talk to engineers. I talk to utility rate advisors. I haven't found a single one who told me it's a good idea. There's various reasons why. Most of the things that I said already. But I've yet to find someone who told me it's a good idea. Yeah, absolutely, you should do it. Part of the reason why I believe we shouldn't do it here in Grosse Pointe Shores is our wet sanitary system that Steve mentioned. Sprinkler water can and does get into our sanitary and storm sewer infrastructure systems. It gets there through footing drains. I know when I run my sprinklers at my house, my sump pump runs. I'm sure that happens at your house too. Sump pumps can, and most likely here in Grosse Pointe Shores, are connected to the sanitary system. Water will run down your driveway and out to the street into a catch basin and out to the lake. Well, that's an infrastructure system that Grosse Pointe Shores has to operate and maintain. We operate and maintain all the catch basins, all the sewer mains, whether it's sanitary or storm. It's because of those reasons that I just list that I believe sprinkler meters are not accurate. Plus, there are other ways. I'm not saying that there's not a problem. What I'm saying is that there are other ways that don't add assets that need to be maintained and operated. There's billing items that we can add. There's winter-based averaging. There's seasonal adjustments. Steve and I just learned Grosse Pointe Farms had this same discussion with their residents in 2022. They enacted a seasonal adjustment. They set a limit, water use limit in the summertime. If you go above that limit, you use more than a certain amount of units. After that, they only charge 20% of the sewer. It's an option. But they didn't add a second meter, an entirely second asset in everybody's house. It is a great. So because sprinkler meters deal with you're talking about removing the sanitary charge on the water rate, it's a great segue into our sewer system discussion. But before I go into our sewer system, one of the reasons why I've heard we want sprinkler meters is because we're not seeing green lawns. We're seeing a lot of brown lawns right now. Well, I was a master gardener for 10 years, so I just want to make a note that the best path to a green lawn is a healthy lawn, not a wet one. Water does help, I'll say that, but a great fertilization program can actually save you money on your water bill. I have one at my house. A guy comes 6 times a year to fertilize my lawn. I watered my lawn twice last year. It was lush and green all year. I'm not exaggerating. It's cost effective to have a good fertilization program. Let me get into the sewer system. We have 2 separate systems in Grosse Pointe Shores. We have a sanitary system and a storm system. They were separated in 1996. Typically, you can say if a house was built after 1970 that they're separated. But here in Grosse Pointe Shores, we didn't do our separation program until 1996. So most likely, if the house was built before 1996, it's entirely connected to our sanitary system. We operate and maintain 17 miles of sanitary sewers, 454 manholes, 2 pump stations, and 3 control structures. Every day, we're in these pump stations. Sanitary sewage flows from your home down into the street. It flows easterly to Lakeshore, where we have our Lakeshore interceptor. It gets collected in there and sent south. We have 1 pump station at Crestwood that handles all the homes north of that. We have 1 pump station at what we call our Cook Road pump station near 507 Lakeshore. It's where Cook Road would have come out to Lakeshore, or it used to. Cook Road pump station handles all the sewage in Grosse Pointe Shores, both from the Crestwood pump station and everything else it collects. Everything goes through the Cook Road pump station. It is then pumped west down Cook Road all the way to Chalfont, where it outfalls into the Grosse Pointe interceptor, or the GPI. The GPI then flows to the Kirby pump station. Both the GPI and the Kirby pump station are operated and maintained by the SEMSD. We do not have a choice to really pump our sewage anywhere else. We're going to get into sewage rates and exceedance fees. And those are 2 separate items. Really, the only commonality between our sewage rate and our exceedance fee is that they deal with sanitary sewage. Our sewage rate, our wholesale sanitary sewage rate from SEMSD is based on annual volume with a 5-year moving average. Just total sewage that we pump, a 5-year moving average. Base flow equals our water use. They literally take our GLWA bills, our monthly bills. They see how much water we used, and they use that in their calculation to make our rates. Total flow, again, for the annual total volume, is base flow plus excess flow, everything above our water use. Just like GLWA, they determine our apportionment, our slice of pie. That's determined by our total flow, and it's updated every year. Just like GLWA, SEMSD has a yearly board-approved budget. And again, just like GLWA, that budget is dispersed to everybody's slice of pie. That becomes our revenue requirement. Here in this case, 100% of our revenue requirement is a fixed monthly charge, and it's updated annually. Every year we get an update charge sheet from SCMS. Now, above and beyond that, we have a completely separate exceedance charge. This is based on flow speed. I'm going to get a little technical, but I don't think there's any way I can make it simpler. We have an agreed upon MOU. We actually had it with DWSD and transferred it when SCMSD took over. That limits us to 3 CFS, that's cubic feet per second, of sewage flow to the Grosse Pointe intersection. Why 3 CFS? Well, we're limited by the max capacity of the Kirby Road pump station. It can only accept so much sewage. If Kirby Road pump station receives more sewage than it can pump out, it starts backing up to the Milk River RTB, retention treatment basin, where it needs to be treated, held, and or treated, and or dumped. So again, it's flow above 3 CFS. So they calculate the volume of flow that we pump faster than 3 CFS. Remember, 3 CFS is a speed, not a volume. So as soon as we hit 3 CFS or we go above 3 CFS, everything is metered. So everything above, they know the speed too. So everything above 3 CFS, the volume is calculated. And that goes into a 5-year moving average. Oh, I'm sorry, a 3-year moving average that is updated annually. That also gets its own slice of pie apportionment, and then that's also updated every year. Here's a little bit more into the exceedance fee. Here's a chart that we get on our chart sheet every year for our exceedance fee. What I really want to point out is the progress that we've made. I'll toot my own horn and say that I was hired in late 2018. That's when we had max flows, 39 million gallons. That's a volume above 3 CFS. Again, it's a 3-year moving average, so it does take time, but it has been dropping. Our high charge was $159,000 per year back in 2020. No, that was when Candice was here, I believe. Or at least she based some of our sewer rate on this charge that probably none of us thought was going to drop this fast. Next year, our exceedance fee will be just $29,000 a year. That's a big reason why we were able to drop your rates 20% last year. Here's a few more charts. This is more to do with our sewage rate, our exceedance fees. Again, I just want to reiterate, base flow equals water use. Total flow is used to determine our portion, that 2.38%. You can see in the middle graph, that's an important graph on the left there. Those are the cities. Grosse Pointe Shores. In 2020, we pumped 47,000 million gallons. Doesn't matter. What the point is that we cut it nearly in half. In 5 years. That's a lot of progress. So what else does our sanitary, our sewer systems need? Well, I do want to point out that our sewer systems are just as old, if not older, than our water mains. They were usually put in at the same time when they built subdivisions. So all those water mains that were installed in the 1950s, our sewer mains were also installed in the 1950s. We did a SAW grant, a sewer and water grant, back in 2017. That was headed up by AEW. What did the SAW grant do for us? Well, we cleaned and televised our entire sanitary system. Well, what did that do? Well, that found problem areas that need to be fixed, places where a possible infiltration can get in, illicit connections. Any problems were marked, tabulated, and it gave us kind of like an asset management plan. It did give us an asset management plan to work off of. Our goals are always to get the water out. What else do we need? Our aging pump stations. We've had discussions with council about the Cook Road pump station. We do maintain our pumps. Cook Road pump station does have somewhat newer pumps. They were rebuilt when I first took over in 2020. Our pumps are good, but the stations themselves were built in the 1950s and they are entirely underground. They will be beyond their life cycle real soon. The Cook Road pump station, we'd also like to build a little bit differently with a actual wet well. Currently does not have a wet well. So our Lakeshore interceptor on Lakeshore always holds sewage. There's nowhere for it to drop out of. We just pump basically directly out of the interceptor. If we were to build a pump station at Cook Road, where it is right now with a 20-foot hole, 40-foot hole, not a hole, a well, our Lakeshore interceptor could be more dry. We'd have less sewage in it. We'd have more storage to hold during a storm. The more sewage we can store during the storm, the slower we can pump it out below 3 CFS. Saving us. This is something that we're always doing. We're always trying to find a illicit connection. We're always trying to disconnect downspouts. If someone calls me up and said their basement floods and I go there and I find they have connected downspouts to their footing drains, they got to get those disconnected. We're always trying to seal up. You know, when we did Oxford, we found 2 catch basins installed to our sanitary system. I can't tell you why they weren't separated in 1996, but that catch basin collects a lot of water. So anytime we can find anything like that, it helps save us money. So that's our water and our sewer systems. In conclusion, I'm going to go over the water again one more time. Again, if we can lower our max day, lower our peak hour, we'll lower rates for everybody. We still have a lot of infrastructure improvements to do, as you see on that list. Any change in our water source, and I'm not against changing our water source, but any change in our water source would require storage. So that's something we want to consider in the future. When our contract is up in 2040, we should probably start considering water storage. If we can do it, where we can do it, how we can do it, and how much it's going to cost. No matter what we do, results take time. On the sewer side, I want to reiterate that rates are based on water use. Just like the water side, we have many necessary infrastructure improvements. We got to take care of these mains, we got to take care of these manholes, we got to take care of the pump stations. But every improvement on the sewer side makes a difference. And the more flows the more water we can get out of our sanitary system, the more money we save. Again, results take time. That's it. That's all I have for you today. Up next is going to be Dale, who's going to talk about our city finances when it comes to our water and sewer.
Good morning, everybody. It's time to talk dollars and cents while everyone's here. Now that Mike's finished his presentation, we'll go through what dollars and cents are required to support the operations of the water and sewer department. We'll walk through first the revenue requirement, detail the expense requirements that we have to achieve, a brief rate history, and lastly, a review of prior council actions on the system and its rate modeling. All right, this first slide. On many of these slides, as I get into various charts further down, it may be easier to follow in your packets rather than the slides themselves. The first, you'll see the total proposed budget upcoming is $3.18 million, or let's just say $3.2 million. Of that, the distribution of revenues collected include usage or utility fees of 2.4, bond retirement fees of 475,000, late fees penalties 16,000, and some grants were received, which Mike and Hubbard and Clark for net line inspections. On the expense side, you'll see that the Great Lakes Water represents 23% of our budget for expenditures. South Macomb, 24%. Capital and repairs combined 22%. Wages and miscellaneous costs assigned to the water department, it's 12%. Bond retirement, 15%. All right, we're first going to, one of the first slides, I want to take us through expenses first. because those are relatively fixed. And then we work backwards. What are the revenue requirements to meet those and achieve those expenses? So the first we'll discuss is Great Lakes Water Authority. Our proposal, the increase proposed or the total rate proposed for the community is $720,000. As Mike noted, it's 60% based on a commodity or 60% on commodity charges and 40% combination of peak flow and usage. Of that 727, that represents 23% of $735,000 of our budget. As Mike pointed out, there's various calculations or factors that go into developing that rate by Great Lakes Water itself. The factors include hourly peak demand, daily peak demand, certain distance factors, and overall volume. There is a great emphasis with the Great Lakes billing or modeling system for rates, as Mike noted, on peak and daily demand. That has a very significant impact on what your rate is for Grosse Pointe shores. Now, the volume is average when that bill is calculated over a 3-year period. Peak demand and max day demand is essentially 1 day a year. Now, that since it's such a major reliance of the calculation of the shore's ultimate cost, your sprinkler ordinance that was adopted by council really made a significant difference. One of the options could have been to build a water tower, which would have helped as Grosse Pointe Woods did. But as you undertook the sprinkling ordinance, you avoided the capital cost and had a significant impact on what these charges amounted to be. As Mike noted, I'll repeat, you have about 17.5 miles of water main, and you're obligated with a 30-year contract with Great Lakes Water. I don't know how many years are left to run, but I believe it's over 20 additional years. Rates are reviewed by Great Lakes Water every 4 years. In 2027 will be the next segment of a rate review undertaken by the member communities in Great Lakes Water. That will impact the distribution of how much of community costs are based on volume, max day, max hour, and so forth. So that's reset and revisited every 4 years. And as I noted, the next is in 2027. One last note again on this I would make is Mike's note that the peak, because peak is has such a large play in what your costs are, by having your sprinkler ordinance undertake that sprinkling in the evening, the peak periods that are considered exempted by Great Lakes Water is watering between 12 and 6 would have the least impact or the ability to lower that peak in the daytime hours when that factor is determined. So I believe your peaks are down 33%, off the top of my head. So that made a significant difference. Over the last 2 years in the water and sewer fund operations, since 24, overall costs within the fund budgeted were 2% or less. So costs have been maintained at a very constant level. So next slide, we're going to speak to South Macomb Disposal Authority. Mike discussed, we received two basic billings. One is the exceedance, and the other is basically volume. Great Lakes Water informs South Macomb what their costs will be. In effect, South Macomb is a subcontractor of Great Lakes Water and how fees are dispersed. Great Lakes informs South Macomb reviews that along with their internal cost allocations as to what is necessary. And that's done annually. South Macomb's total cost within our budget is $775,000 for the upcoming year, or approximately 24% of our total. between Great Lakes and South Macomb represents about 50% of our costs within the water and sewer fund. So doing the excessive flow or exceedance rates really made the sprinkler ones really made a big difference. Now, further on South Macomb, discussing exceedance rates. 10, 15 years ago, your penalty or exceedance rate fee, in my opinion, was around $150,000 annually. Because your average exceedance, which is determined over a 3-year average, was approximately 20 was your average back in 2019. It's gone down to 4. Overall, the exceedance share of your total fee represents 94% of your total billing to South Macomb. The balance, 96%, is based on volume. On the volume itself, volume is calculated over a 3-year average, I believe, a 5-year average. And Grosse Pointe Shores overall average, the total cost or volume related to the other member communities was slightly reduced last year. It was 2 years ago, 2.5%. It's gone down to 2.3. As that has gone down, the related costs assigned to Grosse Pointe Shores has slightly gone down as well. This reflects the average I noted. If you'll look at 2017, 18, and 19, that average is approximately 20 mg exceedance rate that was used. How that's calculated, mg is million gallons. So your average was 20 million gallons over that 3-year period, resulting in what the exceedance fee was, which I believe was around $150,000 that period. If you look at the years 22, 3, and 4, that average is 4 million gallons. As a result, that fee has dropped all the way down to $29,000. That's where I noted that's 4% of your total cost to SMD. The next we'll discuss within the budget repairs and capital improvements. This represents in the neighborhood of 22% of our total expenses expected for next year. The repair figure is based on what is currently occurring in the current year, and we project what may be required in the future upcoming year. Capital improvements vary from year to year. One of the major inputs on that capital improvement cost of $455,000 is the automatic read system that this community is looking at upgrading. This is further defining the difference of repairs between the water system side and the sewer system side. You'll see the current budget for 24-25 is $190,000 in total, so 115 plus 75, and 25-26, $335,000 for repairs and the upgrade of the automatic reader system. Capital improvements, $455,000. Now, up to this point with the costs we've reviewed, Great Lakes Water, South Macomb, bond fees, and repairs, capital improvement estimation represents 84% or $2.5 million of your $3.1 million budget. So is there much room to move in those expenses? It depends year to year. Repairs, bond fees are fixed, $475,000 a year for the next 25 years, essentially. South Macomb's been relatively flat as far as your increases, for modest increases in Great Lakes. It's a lot for Grosse Pointe Shores, depending on weather. The drier it is, the more water we sell. Next, we'll talk about wages, benefits, and costs assigned internally for operating the water and sewer system itself.
I would note they consist of $372,000 or 12% of your total operating expenses. Of that 12%, it represents the following services. You have the supervisor of the water board, you have the full-time billing clerk, and then you have these other support services and activities undertaken. Many of these costs are distributed amongst several funds for the department as a whole. But the services include, besides or in addition to these water supervisor, water department supervisor, enforcing the sprinkler ordinance, hydrant repairs, painting, flushing, and general administrative duties, you'll see that that $372,000 is a very reasonable allocation based on our total labor cost. This is a distribution of total labor costs for the community as a whole by department. You'll note under water and sewer services, $372,000 represents 7% of our total labor costs, which I believe is very reasonable. When you look at the next slide, this one, and maybe you can look at your handout itself, you'll see the amount of cost allocated. How is that labor cost and benefit costs associated with the water board, water sewer board, compared to other cities? You'll see on this slide, $372,000 represents per household $280 on average per household for the shores. Compare that, the highest is Grosse Pointe Park at $1.5 million for $346,000. And in between, you've got Grosse Pointe City and Grosse Pointe Woods. The Woods is $165, and the city is $208. So when you look at it comparatively, how much is being charged for maintaining the system administratively and direct labor costs, that total of $377, or 12% of our budget, is very reasonable. The next we'll discuss is the bond retirement. That's part of the total operating budget of $3.2 million. $476,000 for a 30-year bond that expires in 2052. The payments are as follows. This current fiscal year that we're within is an interest payment only of $285,000. This coming 2026, that's going up to $475,000. It's the first principal payment within this total payment is starting in 2026. That 475, based on the number of customers within the community, will average $106 per resident per billing. The current year is approximately $80 per billing, which covers just the interest. Now we're going to discuss revenues. As I noted over the last couple of minutes, our expenses have been flat around 2%. However, the greatest impact you'll have on your homeowner's bill, two factors. Number one is the weather. Number two are the rates on how money is collected on your bill itself. The council last year received, for the last several years, concerns about the water billing and the volume of water charges during the summer months, particularly so on the sewer side of that rate system. Now, I mentioned earlier, a lot of it's dependent on weather. If you'll note, your user fee on a per unit basis in 23 was $16.54, 24 the same. Last year, there was a first step to move away from the usage fee and disperse it in part through the operations fee. That usage fee represented a 20% reduction in the sewer portion of that rate and a 7% reduction in the water rate. So when it rains, it takes a little bit of the edge or flattens the curve somewhat on the bill itself. The debt retirement fee, as you'll see, reflects the interest payments only that period. And you'll see last year, we approved the operations fee of $121 compared to the prior year 79. Now, what this slide represents, if you look to the left side of the two pie charts, is the year 2024 is on the left. The largest share of that pie is the revenues derived from the usage fee, where 75% of the collections by the community was based on usage. That represents 75%. If you look to 2025 on the right, that went down to approximately 65%. Again, it's as a result of lowering the usage rate. In turn, reduce the reliance and dependency or reactionary bill to the weather conditions. The next slide, I would point out, these are from our financial statements of Grosse Pointe shows. I mentioned how dependent or weather related the rates and costs are, or the costs are. The costs to the community don't necessarily increase from a very dry period, or somewhat they will from a wet, but not from a dry. But what will happen is if you have an unusually dry cycle, costs will rise greatly because the usage rate and volume is what drives that. So what this chart represents, when you look at the fiscal year ending 2023, the total fees were $3.5 million collected in revenue. Now, the community did not budget to collect $3.5 million that particular year, so the revenues exceeded expectations. The reason being is it was such a dry September, that quarter. The bills were significantly higher than the prior periods. And in fact, the difference between the $3,017,000 versus the $3.4 million was a $460,000 swing upward. The following year, last year, 2024, you'll see there was a significant drop because it wasn't as dry and it was a much wetter year. Last year, when the mayor and council reviewed rates, it hoped to shift away from the reliance on the user rate and move more towards a flat, in part to, again, flatten it out and avoid some of these. Now, in 2024, what occurred, it was a very wet year, and the revenues actually dropped by $680,000 in total from the prior year. To break even, based on our expense allowances, the city needs to collect between $2.8 and $3 million. So you can see 24 was close to a little better than a break even, whereas 23, you'll see where we're $500,000 to $600,000 greater numbers collected than what was initially anticipated. Now I'm speaking of dry weather versus wet cycles. This chart reflects your third quarter billings, July, August, September. And you'll see the difference from a dry cycle versus a wet. And on the far left, that is the year September of 22. The community collected $1.3 million on that billing. And that was billed as a result of unit usage of 80,600 units. In the next following year, in September of 23, you'll see we had a wet year and that revenue declined by $400,000. There's a $400,000 swing just from one quarter. When you look at on a monthly basis, you'll see the difference in the next slide on our average and how much difference there is from that third quarter collection from rather than compared to the other three periods. Now on the far right, what you'll see, that's a reflection of the rate reduction the mayor and council put into effect last year. I noted that sewer rates were down 20% and water rates were down 8%. Well, I'm comparing on this chart basically the same number of units for 23 as to 24. you'll see as a result of that, revenues went down close to $150,000. When we reviewed this last year, there was a discussion amongst council that there would be a seasonal rate adjustment. In that discussion, when it was reviewed, we discussed doing it on the basis of how many units does the city require to sell to achieve our revenues? And if we have a dry period like we experienced in September 22, there would be an adjustment to the next billing, which would have been the September billing. You'll see the amount, go back. The amount of overall, the overall units built and sold during that period between the 2 years, from the center point to the left is the period of September 22 through June of 24, 23. We sold combined units sold was $25,000 greater than the following year. On average, we would expect to budget around estimated volume of 135,000 units. On the left, it totaled considerably more than that. It was like $154,000 units. That difference resulted in that huge uptick on the left of your revenues. You sold that many more units because of the rate dependency on volume versus your operational fee, created that big jump. Lastly, we're looking at our proposed budget coming up. We're working on it now. How do we compare to upcoming communities? Last year, the shores absorbed or actually reduced rates. This year, we're reviewing it and looking at nominal increases. How does this compare to our neighboring communities? If you look, they'll range from 4% for the farms, 5% for the city, 8% for the woods, and up to 23% for the park. So rates and costs are going up significantly. As I pointed out, our expenses the last 2 years, we maintained at a 2% increase. I think that was the average over the last 2 years. So comparatively speaking, how are we doing on holding costs? Very well. The dependency on water and rain and weather, as I pointed out, makes a huge variation in what you pay, but it's not necessarily the internal expenses. The expenses are under control, but your income's so reactionary to weather. And let's see if I, yeah. No, that's it. Hope that out.
So just in closing, I'll just do a really quick recap here. A couple things what we kind of learned are a few key points. We do have an asset management plan in place that we review on a yearly basis. Our sprinkler ordinance that we enacted resulted in lower rates in 2024. We began major infrastructure work in 22, which resulted in significant reductions in excess flows, which allowed for that 20% decrease in sewer rates last year. Working with our partners from SEMSD, we removed the cap. That's a corrective action plan. So from the MOU that's still in existence, which gave us immediate relief from expenditures that we had anticipated making that we now don't have to make. We still have to do work, but we didn't have to do it at the pace that we had, and that was a great accomplishment. Where are we going? Currently, we're seeking proposals for a rate study, a cost of service study, which we're looking forward to getting proposals for the next city council meeting. And what that'll do for us, it'll get us a third-party look at our overall system and provide information to council when making decisions going forward. Continuing to seek ways to reduce those excess flows. That's something that we're doing on a daily basis, working with our engineers, trying to do things cost effectively and with infrastructure upgrades. And we'll be in negotiations in 2026 with GLEWA, where we'll seek to reduce rates even further than we have already. And so at this time, what I'll do is not for their safety, but what we'll do right now is we're gonna take questions for our panel here. I'll get out of the way here. And so if you just raise your hand, state your name, any questions for our guests from GLEWA, SDM, SD, or our engineers.
Steve. My name's John Deckman. I'm one of the council people here at Grosse Pointe Shores. Matt, may I call you Matt?
Yep.
Thank you. Couple questions for you. Mike stated that LEWA calculates rates with the same formula across the board for all of its customers. That's correct?
Yes,
And you have about 80 to 90 customers?
85.
Okay. Of those, other than Grosse Pointe Shores, how many are 100% residential? Okay. You expect it to be, is it safe to say that we are probably the only 100% residential customer? Okay.
One of the few, John.
One of the few. Because Mike noted that we're the seventh highest charged community of the 85. Does GLEWA look at this calculation, this across the board calculation, this uniform calculation as reasonable to every community, especially when you have an outlier community like Grosse Pointe Shores, which is 100% residential, dealing with very specific high peak rates averaged at the expected time, which is much different than, say, a light commercial community, a industrial community, a mixed use community.
Well, the calculation we use is a uniform standard of the American Water Works Association. That is our base. We use the M1 manual, which if you Google it is the standard across the board for water rates. The separation of the system into average day, max day, peak hour is really the way that we differentiate the differences between communities. So we assign our costs based on part of the system that is related to those particular cost pools. For instance, our peak hour cost pool is really associated with the pumping and the hourly demand.
Right.
Our treatment is a max day function, and then your average use is really assigned to that commodity piece that we assigned to our members. So the way we separate it out through that calculation process is meant to create that demand profile for each community. So the higher peak you are, the more cost you will get in that peak hour cost pool, and the lower peak you are, the less of that you'll get.
Right, so that's, my concern is that a community like ours, with that high peak average, that 6 a.m. to, 9 a.m. or something like that roughly, when you're dealing with 100% residential community, we don't have an industrial facility nearby that uses a ton of water. We don't have a meat packing plant or something like that. There's a ton of water. We don't have car washes and golf courses and things like that. Does GLEWA look at that and has ever considered, well, I understand uniform rates, but always with uniformity, there can be exceptions. And with a community like ours, has it ever been addressed if maybe a different formula should be used for outlier communities like ours?
So, that's a answer. But Matt and I both have sat on GLWA committees where we talk about the methodology concerning water rates. And I'm going to use an example. So Birchville Township, they're a small township. They also have really high wholesale water rates. Why? They have 2 state parks. People at the state park use the water in the morning. And that's the main use of the water for the whole city. But Birchville, as a township, is a GLWA customer. GLWA doesn't see it as, oh, that's just going to the state park, let's give them a break. No, They treat everybody the same. Now, I think what they may consider is if we were to exceed that fee. Now that causes, I'm gonna quote, unquote, problems. Now you have to go in front of a board, in front of the analytical board. You have to present an excuse as to why you exceeded your actual peak hour. There is where they might give you a break and say, well, you're 100% residential, but nothing's guaranteed, John.
Yeah.
You can't guarantee that they would say, oh, Grosse Pointe Shores is 100% residential, don't worry about it, we won't change it. But that's where they have leeway, where they can consider a small break, but not in the contract.
One follow-up question. Matt, is Great Lakes Water Authority subject to the review by the Michigan Public Service Commission? No.
We're regulated by EPA.
And gentlemen from SEMSD, do you have any oversight requirements to the Michigan Public Service Commission?
I do not, Councilman.
Thanks.
Other questions for our panel?
My name is Greg Boudreau, North Edgewood Drive. I have a question both for our panel and thank you, Mike, for the description of the water lines. I have a knowing that we've got a similar infrastructure problem on water and sewer lines coming into our community and out of our community. And what are the projections by SEMSD and GLWA for the next 10 years on infrastructure and capital improvements and replacements? And how is that going to affect our costs for services?
Yeah, we can go first. So the SEMSD does have a capital improvement program. Which is based on an asset management plan. We project forward repairs and improvements to the system. We televise all the sewers every 5 to 7 years. We look at the sewers that we own and we recommend improvements. We look at all the other infrastructure, manholes, pump stations, and every year where we have built-in capital improvement dollars, and we have a 10-year capital improvement plan that looks forward every year that we rebalance. We've been fairly stable with our capital improvements around, I believe, $1.7 million is what we charge as a whole, so we can stabilize rates. We look forward and collect money to reduce rate swings. So we do have a plan that does that.
And we also did 2 years ago at the Kirby pump station, we put in 5 new pumps there, which was at a cost of $700,000 to host those pumps, which are critical to the whole system here. And we're in the area of, I think, about 25 years old. So we did just recently, in 2023, put all 5 of those pumps in there. So.
And the SEMSD did take over the system in 2008 from Wayne County. So we are being proactive. There really wasn't, I'd say, an asset management plan looking forward. We actually have for Kirby, we have 3 pumps on standby off-site so that if anything does happen, that we can swap those out. The contract capacity is 4 pumps, but we have 5 in service, three, I'll say, on the shelf ready to go. So that pumps the entire flow to the Great Lakes Water Authority system. We are a customer of the Great Lakes Water Authority system. So we go into their system, which goes down to Detroit for treatment at the wastewater treatment plant.
Danielle Gaylor, City Council. Just to be clear, Mike, Kip, and Kyle, you were talking about the pump stations that you own and operate. We own our own pump stations, correct? So we will be solely responsible, City of Grosse Pointe Shores, in managing that.
Correct.
And that cost. SMSD has nothing to do with that.
Not with our Crestwood or.
With our current system, I just want to be clear.
This question is for Matt, primarily. Ted Kuczynski, Mayor of Grosse Pointe Shores. There was a major event southwest Detroit, water main break, and I think on TV they said it was going to be split 50-50 between Cleva and the customer of the city of Detroit. Well, some of the residents, or one of the residents called me to find out will that cost, that 50% cost be passed on to the other customers? And of course, I assume that the answer would be yes. I mean, it's just, but it was a major event, and I think the water main, there was some particularly difficult circumstances with respect to that water main. The location, the depth of it, and then the age. They were over 100 years old, I think. They said cast iron pipes usually going to last 100 years to 120 years, what they said on TV. I don't know. Do you have any comments about that?
I wasn't involved in the response to that directly. I do know that City of Detroit and GLWA did have an agreement to cover all of the uninsured costs 50/50. So we're talking about like hot water heaters and things like that to make the homes livable. I don't know what our executive leadership team's plan is for the cost recovery of that, but in our budget, we have money set aside for things of this nature. And so I wouldn't expect it to flow through to a rate increase necessarily, but certainly it would come from our budget, which is paid for directly by.
Because you was planning that contingency typically, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry, are you done, Ted?
Yes.
Okay. This is kind of a simple question to help me understand this a little bit better, but on the wholesale water rate formula, 60% of everybody's revenue is charged via its monthly charge. So I'm assuming that the total dollar amount is divided by, let's say roughly 1,100 homes, I think is what we have.
So that's the wholesale rate formula. We don't charge our residents a flat. That doesn't correlate exactly to a flat rate.
Okay,
Like I said, it's based on flow. So you really want to use flow to calculate your retail water rates.
all right, so,
Ideally, GLWA would charge us 100% fixed rate. They'd love that because it's great for budgeting. But it's not really, they don't feel like it's like the right way to do it. They have to charge a portion of our revenue requirement via commodity per unit. I want to make it clear that just because we receive the bill as a fixed rate, it does not mean we pass it to our residents as a fixed rate. That's not the way to do it.
so to help me understand then my water bill a little bit better, the 100% of the charge, so you got 60% of the fixed monthly charge and 40% of the usage charge. That's all coming through into my water bill. But how do I know the difference between the usage and the fixed in my water bill?
The 60/40 is what the community receives as its bill.
Right.
Now, how the community passes on its cost to the residents is a different ratio, basically. It's a combination of how high your operation fee is or isn't on a fixed basis and the amount of water you use, because we use a $14.04 rate on every unit of water you use. You use 20 units, your bill's based on 20 units times, regardless of how we were billed. That's how your bill is assessed.
So let me so one of the things, guys, what happens is, so if you take a look at his chart with all the charges, what happens is we get those 60/40 charges that comes in. So that's a number, whatever that number is. Then we get SCMSDs. We take all those numbers with our expenses, put it in, and then we look at what is our revenue requirement when you add up all those different things. That's how we then figure out the rate. So it's your rate's not based on necessarily everything that they're giving us. It's based on other factors as well. So your rates really don't correlate to the 60/40 that we're getting from them. That's just a fixed number we're getting from them. We get a fixed number from SEMSD. Then we look and say, okay, here's our total cost for the system this year. What do we need to make rates to do that? And then we look at what you'll see is where your sewer and your water rates differ, and we'll have probably another change, we imagine this year. We take a look at all those costs and we say, okay, these are affixed to the sewer costs, so it would be what we get from them, and then how much of our manpower is working on sewers, those type of things, and then we'll apportion some to water. Then we decide, okay, so it's 50/50, so your rate's $7 for water, $7 for sewer. So that's how we figure out those rates.
So it sounds like then all the costs are added up, and then they're charged to the resident by usage.
Yes.
And so you have part of your usage is sewer, part of your usage is water. So if I want to reduce my rate, the best way or the only way to reduce my, not my rate, but my total bill would be to use less water.
That's
And
correct.
then everything would come down. My water use would come down, my sewer use would come down.
Yes, or other ways to do it is what we've done. So move those peak hours back in, where we move that peak hour back so that we can then get a lower bill. So it's not necessarily just using less water, but using the water at the right time, it might be the answer. And so alternating days, as Mike talked about, is another possibility. So we use less. So there are a few things, but yes.
There's a problem with that even.
Yeah, yes.
I think this way, on July 31st is an I. Guess what? August 1st is.
It's a simple way.
Yeah, yes, exactly. It might be a days and days of the week or whatever, but yes, that's how that works. If that helps. Any other questions for our panel?
Yeah, just a simple one. So Highland Park, Michigan, in the past had defaulted on their water bill to famous people. And the other 85 or so communities incurred that debt, which was then given back to communities after the state legislature made some suggestions on that. How much of that money was actually returned to communities? And the second question I had tied on to what the mayor asked, with what just happened in Detroit and this large cost, would that then be incurred upon those communities and perhaps given back in the future as well?
So to answer your question on Highland Park, we did, the GLWA board did approve a repayment of what we call bad debt credits. On the water side, it was all of it. On the sewer side, it was much larger, so there was only a portion of it came back to the communities. And that was included in the bill. It should have been with your July service in August of 2024. You would have seen a credit. The member partners would have seen a credit on their wholesale charge at that point. And then for the Southwest Detroit, as I mentioned before, I don't believe that it's going to be significant enough to be passed on as a rate increase. But what I think it is it's an emergency purchase that was already included in our budget.
Thank you.
Mr. Boudreaux.
This is a forward-looking question, but Michigan is a net recipient of funds from Washington. In other words, we receive more money back from the feds than we send. And I'm curious what SEMSD and GLEWA budgets, what portions of your revenue plan or your budgets are contingent on grants from either the federal or the state government, which in this political climate right now are highly at risk. And if our sources of revenue are impacted, you're going to have to increase our costs. So again, I'm looking further out, and I'm just trying to get a sense of what's coming down the pipe for us.
Yeah, zero. So we have a capital improvement plan, and we base our pricing on that. If we get a grant, it only helps us in the future, because we have not booked our capital improvement plan with future unknown grants or grants that we have now that would go away. We do get grants, right? We do see grants, and that does help our system, but we don't rely on that when we project future costs.
It's the same thing for GLWA. In fact, we actually don't get very many grants because we're not a city, village, or township. Generally, our money that we get is through principal forgiveness, through SRF loans from the state. So that's where we see the benefit of that federal tax money. But in general, we don't get a lot of big dollar grants at GLWA. So we don't anticipate them. We take them if we get them, certainly, and if we have the ability to pass the savings on, we can. But in general, we don't count on grants as part of our revenue requirement.
And I don't know, Grosse Pointe Shores got ARPA funds, but the SCMSD was not entitled to ARPA funds.
I was just gonna ask that
We
question.
were not entitled to that, so.
All right, are there any other questions for our panel? Please.
Jeff McKean from Stonehurst. HRC representative, do you have a recommendation for how much water and sewer main we should be addressing each year?
It's always a tough question because you have to look at what your priorities are. So again, like Mike had said earlier, it's best to be proactive instead of reactive. And the problem is with this aging infrastructure that we all have, the nation, not just Southeast Michigan and Michigan, is to get ahead of that because you don't want issues such as 54-inch in Detroit. There's been obviously a lot of sewer issues, as you know, over the years, Fraser Warren area, you name it. So what a lot of communities are trying to do is to come up with an annual program, if you will, for sewer water improvements, looking at the oldest and most, I guess, well, as far as the water side, if we've got a lot of water main breaks on a line, that's obviously a priority. If you have undersized mains, that's a priority because especially these mains, if they're 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years old, over time you get this regulation build up in the pipe. So a 6-inch pipe is probably more like a 4.5 inch pipe. It's an issue. So a lot of communities are now trying to set money aside annually if they can, if it works within a budget, to do these type of replacement programs for your water and sewer. It's obviously it's all based on how much you budget. There's not that much grant money available for that kind of stuff now. There's loans, but again, you're paying, you know. So it's based on the priorities that each community has and the budget rules. But it's always obviously a great idea to be proactive. Every system that we work with, Jen can attest to that, it's just has issues as far as water and sewer and roads for that matter. That it's you know, things have to be done, set aside annually so you can kind of get ahead of these before there's larger issues.
I would add that from the SAW report that focused on the sanitary system, there was a plan laid out for 20 years. And each year it averages out, I would say, around 250,000 for sanitary. And I would think water would be something similar. And what we've tried to do with the city is we looked at road condition, what's its road rating. We looked at the water main like issues where there's smaller size or there's been water main breaks. And then we look at the SAW results. We kind of overlay all these all together on one map, and we're trying to pick out where you have the trifecta occurring, where you've got a bad road, you've got perhaps water main that needs to be replaced, and a sewer repair. So that's like the biggest bang for your dollar to fix that, and it's like a holistic approach to ensuring that, you know, you're spending your money on a good thing that needs a lot of repair. So I don't know that we have a dollar value per year. We work with the city and say, here's what's recommended, like what can you guys afford?
Eddie, this is for you and Jennifer. Can storage be achieved by using the horizontal pipes in the city? Like we found out with Deeplands with the new development, and they ringed the property, I believe, with their sewer lines or water control lines. Can you achieve storage that way as opposed to a tower? Or I thought we learned something with Deeplands, with the new development of Deeplands.
Water versus water, drinking water?
Right. Yeah, it's obviously, people probably talk about two different things. Like in Deeplands, that was storage detention of stormwater. So there's large pipes there on the east side of the property, which is for stormwater collection. So that's different than I believe what Mike was talking about as far as drinking water storage.
Oh,
You know, towers. You know, but yeah, we're talking here. You're I don't know if you're thinking of.
that was with the
drinking water.
federal law, the clean water program. I think we were required, the developer was required to follow some
Yep.
updated standards.
Yeah.
So that's different.
Kevin Hanlon. On that same note about storage, a couple of, through the discussion, I noted that recommendation of a water tower, a storage facility, would help us in many ways. We wouldn't have to do all these gymnastics of trying to water certain times, our rates could go down, et cetera. I don't know if the city has, or certainly you folks, given a recommendation to revisit that. It's about 15 years ago, it was revisited and was easily just squelched by one local community that didn't want the noise, particularly of the, as I understand, of the water tower being filled. The obvious location, I think, and it had been looked at, is behind the building here on the hill, and part of it below the hill, and not be too obscene to go above the hill. To me, on many levels, that gives us a great deal of flexibility. One, we could change our water source potentially to join with other community that has water that would be able to pump it at an off time. Two, the sprinkler system would help completely be eliminated essentially with that. And I would really think that it'd be very important for the whole group to look at this very carefully. I hadn't heard any discussions in your presentation other than the fact that it would be an advantage, be an advantage, be an advantage. But what about looking forward? You talk about the infrastructure. Certainly this is part of the infrastructure. It leads to the idea that Mr. Mayor here was under the understanding that the sewer retention had something to do with the water storage, and it certainly doesn't, of course. So is there a recommendation that all you people that are involved in this could make to a community such as ours for a water tower?
We could absolutely revisit it if the council wants us to, they can just ask us to revisit it if they want us to.
And we've had, and just so you know, we've had these ongoing discussions with our engineers as looking at another water source. And if you had another water source, would we need what type of storage? We've talked about underground storage as well, that you may not have to build up. You may be able to do underground storage. We've talked to Eagle about that at the same time. So yes, those conversations, we have had those. We haven't pursued them. We are in a contract till 2040, or at the end of 39. So we do have some time, but yes, we have been looking at those things. And we're looking at a bunch of different options. Look, staff, I just say this, we work with our engineer as well as our partners. We're looking every day, we're looking at things. Is there ways to reduce these bills? And that's why we've made significant progress, we feel, in the last 4 years since our team has been here, making those kind of changes. And we're going to continue to look at these all the time, work with our city council, always doing those things. So yes.
Follow up, Matt, on that question from Dr. Hanlon. Can you tell us of your 85 communities, how many actually use water storage, or how many are like us?
I don't know the firm number off the top. I think it's in the mid-teens, but
That do or don't?
they do.
That do use water storage. So most don't?
It's split based on demographics.
Okay.
SPP ones that have a benefit will put storage in to reduce their peaks, and some communities can't afford that investment, so they have it's just a mix, and it's unique to each community whether or not they have it.
When you talk demographics, are you talking about residential versus commercial versus industrial?
Yeah.
So where do you see water towers being utilized by your customers?
Mostly in high dense residential customers.
John, on that note, it was pointed out earlier, they revisit the rate modeling. I think the next rate modeling revisit is in 2027. So you can anticipate putting in a water tower, shifting or rotating the days of when you water. But the formula on how those costs are distributed to the communities may change significantly in the future. I would like to see more, for example, more emphasis on just sheer volume, maybe a population factor. But the reliance or the degree that's relied upon now on usage, or I should say peaks, may not be as great. It depends on what the board approves. I think there's a 9-member board.
Right. We'll look at those.
6.
And we'll look at those again.
Dale, then is it a general recommendation that water tower not be constructed prior to 27?
Well, you'd have to look at the cost and analyze cost benefit on that basis.
So just
But you would want to take into account what's the future holder.
is 27 date is kind of a benchmark for moving forward?
On,
And
as far as the rate, on the rate
Yeah.
structure.
So for the fiscal year 2027, we have a 4-year reopener cycle for the and piece of the contract. So it's referred to as our exhibit B. It's where we have the max daily peak hour values as well as the anticipated planning number for your annual usage. We reopen that every year. We go back and we look at the data to determine what your highest demonstrated values would be for your max daily peak hours. And so that's where the opportunity is there to manipulate those to change the inputs to the charge model. And the intention is to have that whole process wrapped up to begin with the fiscal year 2028. So we'll actually start discussions with our member partners probably early spring of 2026. Because we have to go through 88 contracts, so.
John, and not to interrupt, Mr. Mayor, but it would be my recommendation to wait. I do sit in on many of these committee meetings. And the emphasis on the rate structure right now to decrease peak flows and to encourage water storage is an issue for many communities. They bring it up as a subject that needs to be discussed a lot, which is why they're going to be talking about it. So, I've even heard some, water authorities, not GWA, member communities say there's too much storage in the system. Why are you encouraging more storage? There's already too much storage. We need to create a rate structure now that we have too much. There was a time when this rate structure was created, they were at max capacity, GLWA was. They were at a point where they were considering building, more filtration facilities because they were at max demand. They were maxed out, so they needed people to build these storage facilities because they were maxed out. Well, a lot's changed in the last 10 years. Their demand is about now nearly half of their capacity. Their max demand is nearly half their capacity. So some people say we have too much storage in the system. So this is going to be a discussion. So when I'm in my silo here in Grosse Pointe Shores, I would recommend waiting to see where these discussions go, because I'd hate to build a multi-million-dollar storage facility and then the benefits for that kind of get thrown out the window with rate methodology.
Matt, if I can ask a question. A lot of the emphasis is on max day, maxed out. Relative to the capacity of the entire Great Lakes water system. How does that compare? For example, when so much emphasis is placed on peak, are you beyond your capacity or do you still have capacity available?
So each contract has a 10% operational buffer on top of your highest demonstrated value. So if you exceed your contract limit, you're above your capacity for each community. And each community is unique. And we have such a large system, each part of the system functions differently as well. So
What leads to where I'm going to is, let's say your system as a whole can sell 10 million gallons a day. I'm just grabbing a number. If it's capable of doing that on your 1 or 2 peak days a year, are you close to that max capacity or do you have movement? For example, our max is determined, here's the system max as a whole, and our peak is 20% gap, 30% gap.
So they have a max capacity of nearly 1 billion gallons a day, right? 2.6 billion gallons a day, and I think you reach 60% of that.
maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so-
just going down over time.
Okay.
But 10 years ago, they were at max capacity.
But what I will say, sewer side though, is that we do frequently meet capacity
On the source.
on the sewer side.
That's all the phone's doing a good job on that.
Any other questions for our panel?
Oh, one quick question, Matt. My understanding of the contract that we have is we could join in with an existing customer or contracting party, like, let's say Grosse Pointe Woods, And I say Grosse Pointe Woods because I understand the water comes in through or from Grosse Pointe Woods and it's metered right there. I mean, I don't know if that would result in any savings. I know they have water storage on their own city property, and it's larger than what they need. I mean, Gail, that may be what you were talking about, or Mike was talking about, the storage may not be as advantageous, Mike. I mean,
So, it's an option. I'm not gonna, I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say the answer is as easy as saying yes. If I were Grosse Pointe Woods, I certainly wouldn't want to take on Grosse Pointe Shores' keys. So they're gonna want to either surcharge us or they're gonna force us to build water storage. So it would be my recommendation to build water storage, take care of that peak, and then present to them a real low peak hour max day number and say, can we just buy our water from you? And I think you'll have a way better chance of getting them to say yes.
thanks.
Help me understand why peaks are as important as they are. When you have, you're pumping 60% of capacity, you got billions of gallons. Why would it matter if there's a blip in Grosse Pointe Shores in the middle of the day versus anything? Why don't you just say, instead of looking at the individual Grosse Pointe Shores, look at all your 85 contracts together and then base it on that? I mean, why is the peak? Is it an opportunity for you to capture, an increased rate at a certain time? Is it overcapacity the system? I mean, why is the peak even an issue?
Well, it's an accurate way of figuring out your wholesale rate. It's an accurate way of figuring out your demand, which correlates to your.
So is the whole, if you sum up the entire usage, not just a peak.
No, yeah, no, I get it. You're asking.
You've got a meter that
You have the
says
capacity.
this much water comes into that community over this period of time.
Right.
That's
No,
how much water I use.
I get it. Because the system as a whole isn't meeting its max demand. Why does it matter? Well, it does matter to all the other cities because of that, the contract, the wholesale rate formula. So I can't arbitrarily lower my peak hour number and then exceed it.
Well, I understand, and you don't control the formula.
Right.
But I'm telling you, I think something goes back to the formula, the way they do it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm telling you, I think that the peak is a guise to try to raise a rate, keep people in certain compliance. And when it was close to capacity, I understand that totally.
Yeah.
But if it's not even anywhere close to capacity, why does the peak even matter? How much I use in a period of time.
Those are
And I know it's a way that you can estimate, but I don't want an estimate. I want to know exactly what I use and I want to pay for what I use.
I think those are discussions that we'll have in 2027 when they come up. That
Exactly.
methodology that we're in
And even
was created to limit our everyone's peaks because they were at.
Well, I
they were at
understand,
peak
but
capacity.
even having the storage, even if you take the peak off the table, the storage is not a bad idea. You have to look at it, cost and all that kind of stuff, and it's going to change in 2007. We can't be one step behind, their water rate changes and how they do it. They need to work more in collaboration with the communities and what the community's demands are. And you're not a profit making, are you for profit? Right. So you should benefit the entire communities that you serve without trying to get profits. Just maintain what you need to do and have reserves. I understand all that. But it should be a closer working relationship with what the communities use and what you guys deliver.
I think in terms of the relationship, GLWA has went above and beyond in terms of
Great.
meeting our customers where they are. We have over 100 outreach meetings with our partners every single year, and we talk about these things. And we don't make decisions in a silo. Most of these decisions, including the methodology itself, is discussed openly with our member partners. And in 2004, our member partners decided to keep the basic methodology the way it is, simplify it a little bit, but to move forward with it. And that was a recommendation from our water analytical work group, which is made up of the member partners themselves. GLWA is represented by staff there, but we don't necessarily influence that decision. We have a room full of folks who are contracted member partners who discuss the issues and make decisions on behalf of that group. They make recommendations to the board of directors, to the executive leadership team. And so that piece is there already. We have a very robust outreach and communication program. And we really do put power in the hands of the partners in terms of, what direction do they want to see in this? And so we have done that. And I think sort of, democratizing the water methodology is something that we really have already done. Generally, when you talk about changing the methodology, it may be a positive impact for one community, but because we are a regional system, we are interconnected. So a positive impact here may be a negative impact to your neighbor and vice versa. So that is one of the reasons why we have these broad discussions, if we do that. And everyone in the system understands that there are winners and losers. And we also have history. JLWA came from the Detroit system. There is a system, and there was an existing system in place that created this interconnected tissue between all of the members. And so we still have that. Any changes to the methodology and one side, it completely has the ability to move the needle up and down, even in small communities like this. Because if your revenue requirement is reduced, then it has to shift to someone else because our budget will not go down. So we keep that in mind, and our member partners are deeply involved in all of these processes as we move through the budget process every year. And we have what we refer to as our charges rollout process, which takes about 6 months to do. It includes 4 or 5 public meetings that are, we invite hundreds of people to explain these processes. We take feedback almost constantly from our member partners. So I just want to say that piece. We do involve folks.
Well, I appreciate that, but I would like to say that Grosse Pointe Shores has no room to grow. There's not going to be a lot of new growth, not going to be a lot of new development, and we could be a model that you could pretty much say it's consistent. It's consistent. If anything, it may go down. And the number of people here, the community, it's not going to grow a lot. And so we're unique in that regard. And I understand that you have to increase capacity. There's a lot of development, maybe in the northern communities and a lot of different places. There's factories being built, the rebuilding of Detroit, all that stuff. But Grosse Pointe Shores is not that. I would say we're not that. And we should, receive what we use versus have to absorb a cost of some other expansion of the system that doesn't fall on our shoulders.
At this point, I want to thank I promised them we'd have them out here by 11:30, and it's 11:30 just about. And so I want to thank everyone for attending for this panel today. We surely appreciate it. I hope answered questions that were asked today, and we're probably going to just wrap up at this point. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
I understand that.
I just had lunch.
Did you?
Yeah, we went to traffic. So,
Okay.
it was a pretty good place. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, we got, it was for, it was shot club too, like, yeah, it's very sad.
Hey, Frank.
Yeah.
I think you're full, but also.
No, yeah, so
Got the application itself. For my job, I was in soccer the 2 years.
Oh, wow.
I've got a lot of background on infrastructure and solid waste. Not sewer, but
Yeah, well, this, I mean,
the guys have done a great job.
Thanks for being involved.
Oh, sure. Oh, okay, I'm glad you did that. Right, for you.
Yeah, well, things need to get out. Thanks for
Yes.
So what is?
So just.
Yeah, but this, yeah, but this.
No.
Just so small. Just, you know, it's a small community, it's all residential.
Well, like the doctor said, it should be. There's no, no, really.
Yes, I appreciate, no, listen.
Something happens, I mean, you know, I'm looking at the town house, we had breakfast. Water. He was running the sprinkler.
Exactly.
And like I said, food is based on water, so water is increasing. We had, before Dale, Dale's big. Finance person. Water sewer, $800. Can we break it out? And that was really kind of based on that. That was really.
Yes, our bills actually, so our bill from them is going on for.
That's, well, maybe we'll build it.
Yeah, with the, yeah.
I
bill everybody.
Well, I'm so glad that you get involved. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, same here. Yeah,
So are we done or not?
no, no, we're gonna, well, I don't think we've,
I haven't bloodied anybody's notes.
well, we got time. Yeah, as far as I know.
I know, so we're gonna.
He said that you looked at the concrete.
You know, Jeff just.
But Mike's got to leave too. We went way longer than we thought. Yeah, he's got to go to Toledo. So
Yeah, I don't know who, Debbie's staying.
thought they were gonna be a lot more people.
Yeah,
There were seven.
Seven, right, yes.